It began with a trick, not a battle. At dawn on July 24, 1944, Japanese defenders on Tinian opened fire on what they believed was a major American landing force. They thought they stopped an invasion. They even reported victory to Tokyo. But there wasn't a single Marine on those boats. While they fired every gun they had at empty landing craft, the real invasion came from the north, onto two beaches so small, most commanders said it was impossible. What followed became the most perfectly executed amphibious assault of the Pacific War. This is how America took an island in 9 days and turned it into the launch point for the atomic bomb. Subscribe for more hidden wartime operations the history books tried to soften. When Saipan fell to U.S. forces on July 9, 1944, the psychological impact on Japan was immediate and severe. For the first time, American bombers could strike the Japanese homeland without needing distant, vulnerable bases. The island sat like a launch pad pointed directly at Tokyo. But just 5 kilometers south of Saipan sat something even more critical: Tinian, a small island, yes, but with terrain so flat and structurally ideal that planners called it a natural aircraft carrier. If Saipan was the unlocked door, Tinian was the hallway leading all the way to Japan's front porch. If the United States seized it, they could build runways long enough for B-29 Superfortress bombers, bringing the war straight into Japan's cities. Waiting even weeks was not an option. Reinforcements could regroup. Japanese artillery could reposition. So, American command issued the order: take Tinian immediately, whatever the cost. Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, tasked with defending the island, knew this was likely his final stand. He oversaw the construction of dense underground tunnels, hidden artillery pockets, and fortified ridges prepared to inflict maximum casualties. Japanese doctrine taught that death in battle was honorable, surrender unacceptable. Defenses were focused on the southwest beaches, the only locations wide and flat enough for a major landing. Ogata believed no general would risk an assault anywhere else. That assumption was his greatest error. American Marine leaders, having suffered heavy losses in similar situations, weren't planning to strike where expected. They were studying 2 tiny stretches of coastline on the northwest side of Tinian, barely 200 meters wide, blocked by jagged coral cliffs, normally impossible for landing even a battalion. But to Marine Command, impossible sounded like the perfect blind spot. They began designing a plan that would flip the entire Japanese defense strategy upside down. A plan not built on overwhelming firepower alone, but on audacity. Planning the assault on Tinian became a masterclass in deception and precision. Major General Harry Schmidt of the WWII Amphibious Corps refused to repeat the mistakes made on Saipan, where predictable tactics led to high Marine casualties. Instead, he and Major General Clifton Cates of the 4th Marine Division devised an operation built on surprising the enemy before a single boot touched the sand. They understood the Japanese were watching the southwest beaches constantly, convinced the Americans would attack the most accessible landing zone. That belief was so strong that Ogata had concentrated nearly all his artillery and infantry forces there. So Schmidt and Cates made that belief a weapon. The real attack would land in the north, at the narrow beaches named White 1 and White 2. But at dawn on Invasion Day, 22 American landing craft would head directly toward the southern beaches, simulating a full-scale assault. These boats were intentionally positioned to be clearly seen from Japanese observation posts, giving the illusion of troop carriers preparing to storm the shoreline. In reality, those craft were empty. No soldiers, no equipment, just a staged performance of invasion. Naval guns on American warships watched closely. As Japanese coastal batteries opened fire on the fake assault force, those firing positions revealed themselves. In less than half an hour, U.S. battleships responded with direct hits, silencing many hidden gun sites before any Marines were at risk. Colonel Ogata, convinced he had already turned back a major landing, ordered reserve forces to reinforce the south, unknowingly weakening his northern flank. Meanwhile, the real amphibious vehicles, specialized LVT doodlebugs, were positioned far from Japanese visibility, ready to land at the coral cliffs of the northwest coast. Their ramps were engineered to drop directly against rugged rock, allowing Marines to climb up and breach the high ground. It was a gamble. If even one element failed, the landing force could be pinned down and destroyed. But if it worked, Tinian would fall fast, and with it, the strategic future of the war would shift forever. At first light on July 24, 1944, the sea around Tinian rippled under the silhouettes of American warships. The decoy force moved toward the southern beaches exactly as Japanese scouts expected, kicking off the deception maneuver. From observation points, Japanese artillery crews watched the landing craft appearing in formation and believed the moment had come. They opened fire with everything they had. Shell bursts rained over the empty boats. U.S. naval gunners returned fire instantly, marking targets and destroying gun sites that had remained hidden through days of bombardment. After just over 30 minutes of intense exchange, the landing craft turned away and retreated across the water. From his command post, Colonel Ogata reported what he believed was a successful repulsion of a major attack. He claimed over 100 enemy craft destroyed and sent urgent orders to reinforce the southwestern sector. He was celebrating victory without knowing it was staged. At 7:30 a.m., while Japanese reserves were still moving south, the real landing commenced in the northwest. Under continuous cover fire from artillery positioned on Saipan and naval guns off the coast, the 4th Marine Division surged toward the narrow white beaches. 20 LVT amphibious tractors moved directly into White 1. Marines jumped onto the sand, facing minor resistance from small pillboxes that were quickly eliminated. Within 60 minutes, nearly 5,000 Marines were ashore and pushing inland faster than any Japanese commander believed possible. White 2 proved harsher. The landing zone was rigged with mines missed in earlier reconnaissance. Several LVTs exploded on contact, causing early casualties. Japanese fire from caves and hidden coral positions stalled the advance, but flamethrower tanks moved in, projecting fire into defensive pockets, forcing positions to collapse. Instead of bogging down, assault units bypassed stubborn enemy nests to maintain momentum. By early afternoon, the lead elements had captured Airfield No. 3 and severed the primary north-south road. Ogata's forces were now split in two, and the Americans had done it before lunch. Night fell on July 24, 1944, and with it came the moment Japanese forces had been preparing for since the first American shells struck the island. Colonel Ogata had lost reliable communication with several units due to earlier bombardment, but had issued standing orders long beforehand. Every man was to fight independently if needed, and eliminate the enemy at the landing beaches in a single decisive counterattack. The doctrine was simple: push the Marines back into the sea or die trying. At around 10:30 p.m., near the center of the Marine perimeter, whispered Japanese voices drifted through the darkness. The Americans heard movement in a dry creek bed, but held their fire until the enemy exposed themselves. Seconds later, hundreds of Japanese infantrymen surged forward in a massed banzai charge, crashing into Company K of the 25th Marines. The Marines immediately coordinated with artillery units, while rear-positioned machine guns poured fire into the creek bed, trapping attackers in overlapping kill zones. Despite staggering losses, a desperate group of nearly 150 Japanese soldiers broke through the Marine lines and reached the rear beach area. But there, they entered another storm of defensive fire, now fired back toward the shoreline they had just crossed. At dawn, 251 Japanese bodies were found stacked like a cone in front of one Marine machine gun position. 2 Marines at that position were killed holding the line, and later honored for exceptional courage. Meanwhile, on the left flank, around 2 a.m., nearly 600 Japanese naval troops from the Ushi airfield launched a separate assault against Company A of the 24th Marines. The attack was fierce and coordinated, wiping out almost all of the platoon leaders before illumination rounds lit the battlefield. Once flares and star shells rose, American guns became deadly accurate. By sunrise, 476 Japanese bodies lay before Company A. That company, which had started the night at full strength, had only about 30 Marines able to fight by morning. On the right flank, tanks attempted to lead another attack, but the results would be even worse. While the center and left sectors were still reeling from the brutal night fighting, the right flank faced a different kind of threat: armor. Around midnight, 5 to 6 light Japanese tanks from the 9th Armored Regiment, supported by infantry from the 50th Regiment and remnants of the 135th Regiment, advanced slowly under cover of darkness. Their hope was simple: reach Marine lines before being spotted and use the tank's armor to punch a hole large enough for infantry to pour through. For a few moments, it appeared the tactic might work. The tanks crept dangerously close, their engines muffled, their silhouettes barely visible. But at the critical moment, U.S. naval illumination rounds rose into the sky. In an instant, the tanks were exposed under blinding light. American anti-tank teams reacted with staggering precision. Bazooka operators fired from concealed foxholes. 37mm anti-tank guns and 75mm half-track cannons rained fire on the vehicles. Within minutes, 5 tanks were destroyed. The 6th turned away, heavily damaged, leaving infantry without armored cover. The infantry advanced anyway, driven by desperation and indoctrination, but they walked straight into a perfectly aligned kill zone. Machine guns fired in crossing patterns. Mortars landed among clustered attackers. Defensive artillery shells exploded in fields already soaked with blood. By dawn, bodies were scattered across trenches and craters, unmistakable proof that the counterattack had failed entirely. Preliminary counts showed approximately 1,200 Japanese killed during the first night of counteroffensives across all sectors. American losses, in contrast, were fewer than 100. Colonel Ogata's grand assault, meant to repel the invaders in one decisive strike, had instead destroyed much of his last available manpower. As the sun rose on July 25th, the island's defense backbone had been shattered. The Marines held the beachhead. The Japanese were now fighting isolated and cornered. And for the first time since the landing began, American commanders believed Tinian could fall faster than anyone had dared predict. With the counterattacks crushed by sunrise on July 25th, American commanders ordered a temporary halt to allow resupply and reorganization. Marines gathered ammunition, redistributed water, and reinforced lines while corpsmen worked through the wounded. By 10 a.m., the pause ended. The advance resumed, but not with reckless speed, with measured precision. The Japanese still held ground in the northern and eastern sectors, including 2 high points, Ushi Point Airfield and Mount Maga. If left intact, these elevated positions could be used to launch further surprise attacks. Reinforcements from the 2nd Marine Division began landing at mid-morning, relieving battered units from the 4th Marine Division. Fresh troops pushed through damaged terrain and smoke-filled ravines. On the left flank, the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines drove hard toward Ushi Point. By midday, they secured the airfield and hoisted the American flag. What had once been a Japanese runway was now the future launch site for American bombers, a symbolic loss for the defenders and a strategic turning point. In the center, the 24th Marines moved south from Airfield Number 3, tightening control over the region. But on the right, progress slowed dramatically. Mount Maga, a steep limestone ridge, served as Colonel Ogata's main command post. Japanese troops held rocky slopes in small groups, resisting with sniper fire and mortar bursts. Instead of slugging forward with heavy losses, the Marines used a double envelopment maneuver. Assault units flanked the ridge in 2 coordinated drives, cutting off escape routes. By late afternoon, Mount Maga fell into American hands. At dawn the next morning, Marines advanced toward Mount Lasso, a higher fallback position. They expected brutal resistance. Instead, it was empty. Ogata's forces had abandoned it overnight. The sudden retreat signaled collapsing morale. With their command posts lost and their counterattacks failed, Japanese defenders were no longer fighting to win, only to delay the inevitable. The momentum had shifted entirely. Tinian was no longer a fortress. It was a battlefield closing in. As July 26th turned to the 27th, the battle entered a new phase. With the strongest defensive positions lost and the Japanese command structure fractured, the remnants of Ogata's forces retreated toward the southeastern third of Tinian. Dense jungle scrub, sun-baked limestone, and broken terrain provided natural cover, but it also turned the retreat into a slow collapse rather than an organized withdrawal. American forces spread their lines across the island from coast to coast, sweeping south like a tightening net. They didn't rush. They moved methodically, clearing every cave, bunker, and concealed ravine. Acting more like hunters than conquerors, the Marines advanced with caution, knowing wounded Japanese soldiers often waited in silence with grenades ready. They probed brush with bayonets. They used flamethrowers on positions refusing to surrender. Each step forward felt like stepping into an ambush. By July 28, the Marines pushed past the last agricultural zones and entered terrain scarred by days of bombardment. The island no longer resembled a tropical plantation. The sugarcane fields had been reduced to blackened ash. The limestone ridges glowed white under the sun, exposed and shattered. Japanese troops that still resisted often fought in isolated pockets, not as coordinated units, but as final stand squads bound by loyalty to the emperor. Some launched silent individual attacks at dusk. Others waited until darkness to charge Marine positions in small suicide bursts. By the morning of July 29th, American patrols confirmed that nearly all organized resistance now existed only within a thin strip of land at the island's southeastern tip, no more than 10 square kilometers. The Japanese troops that stayed behind were choosing to die where they stood rather than surrender. The Marines knew what was coming. They'd seen it on Saipan, Guam, and Tarawa. Before an island falls, it screams one last time. By nightfall on July 30th, the town of Tinian lay in American hands, a devastated shell. Airfield Number 4 followed soon after, further tightening the ring around the defenders. Reports estimated the remaining Japanese strength at less than 2,500, exhausted, trapped, and preparing for their final act. Thousands of Marines waited in prepared positions facing the last stronghold. They did not expect surrender. They expected a night of chaos. The night of July 30th to 31st, 1944, unfolded as predicted, like the final cry of an island that refused to fall quietly. As darkness settled over Tinian's southeastern cliffs, U.S. artillery from both the island and Saipan began an unbroken barrage. More than 2,300 shells of mixed calibers slammed into the Japanese perimeter, detonating limestone, igniting remaining brush, and collapsing cave mouths. Overhead, illumination rounds painted the battlefield in a cold, ghostly glow. Marines compared the sight to watching the horizon melt. Beneath that light, every trench filled with smoke. Boulders rolled down slope like fragments of the island itself being torn apart. Still, the Japanese held on. At dawn, the naval bombardment began. The USS Tennessee, USS California, and 3 cruisers fired over 600 tons of ordnance into an area barely the size of a small town. Survivors later described the impact as though the earth was being folded in half. Those still alive when the shelling paused crawled from shattered hiding places, bloodied and half-conscious, only to face another wave. 69 tons of bombs from aircraft that passed over the island in slow, relentless sequence. With communications gone and organized units destroyed, the defenders reverted to instinct. Some waited inside smoke-choked caves, gripping rifles they could barely lift. Others drifted alone through scorched ravines, seeking somewhere to die unseen. Marines advanced through the gray haze in staggered formations, stepping past overturned earth that still steamed from molten impact. In some sectors, the temperature on exposed rock reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, intensified by residual burning napalm. Small Japanese groups attempted to hold broken perimeters, firing sporadically. Others, near collapse, ran directly toward Marine lines in scattered suicide rushes. These mini-charges were often fought off at bayonet range in stifling heat, visibility reduced to just meters by smoke plumes. One Japanese soldier reportedly emerged coated in ash, swinging a sword at a tank track before being cut down. Another was found clutching a shattered regimental pennant, the fabric fused to his uniform by fire. By late afternoon, American units had reached the final ridge. The Marines dug in, knowing history had shown what comes next. It would not be surrender. It would be desperation. The final night on Tinian began long before the sun set. As Marines tightened their defenses around the southeastern ridge, the battlefield fell silent, except for occasional crackling from embers still burning in the shattered brush. At 10 p.m., the silence broke. Small Japanese squads crawled forward, probing for weak spots with bayonets and grenades. Shotguns and rifles flashed in response. A few attackers slipped through gaps, but were cut down almost immediately. Those who made it close enough detonated grenades at their feet, determined to take someone with them. The Marines had learned to expect it. What they did not expect was how many remained willing to die that way. Just after midnight, the last full banzai attack began. No chance, no formation. Just a ragged surge of exhausted men erupting from the darkness, some missing boots, others bleeding from previous wounds, charging toward a position held by Company A of the 24th Marines. A 37mm anti-personnel cannon stood ready. Each time the crew fired, the canister shell burst into a storm of steel pellets, creating walls of lethal fragments. Wave after wave fell in front of the barrel. In minutes, bodies were piled so high that the gunner had to raise elevation to clear the mound. Marines described the sound of pellets striking flesh as like rain on a tin roof. Still, they came. One attacker managed to reach the gun shield before being stopped. Another crawled beneath a tank and pulled a grenade. The explosion lifted the Sherman's right tread clean off the ground. The tank survived. The soldier did not. By 4 a.m., the assault faded. Dawn revealed the outcome with chilling clarity. Over 600 Japanese bodies sprawled across the slope. Hundreds more were found in caves and brush, having committed suicide in the hours before. A handful, too weak to fight or die, sat quietly among the dead. Some whispered apologies. Others simply stared into nothing. At 1855, on August 1st, 1944, General Schmidt declared the island secure. Resistance had ended. The Battle of Tinian was officially over. In 9 days, nearly the entire Japanese garrison was annihilated. American losses, while painful, were comparatively light. Strategically, Tinian was now in U.S. hands, a launch platform for B-29 bombers. Within 6 months, aircraft from this very island would burn Tokyo. Within 1 year, 2 bombers from Tinian would drop the weapons that ended the Pacific War entirely. Tinian was more than a victory. It was the moment the path to Japan truly opened, truly opened, truly opened.